Hi guys, so recently I spoke to income inequality campaigner Gary Stevenson about the greatest threat facing the economy at the moment, the massive transfer of wealth from the government to the rich. We talked about the cost of living crisis, how the pandemic has helped the rich, and possible ways to deal with this issue. Make sure to check out Gary's YouTube channel and his social media links in the description. Okay. Hi everyone, welcome to this interview with Gary Stevenson. Gary, it's great to have you on. Before we begin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? So you used to be a trader in the city, is that right? And then you did a massive shift to income inequality. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I started working as a trader in 2008, June 2008. So that was just before, obviously, the financial crisis happened. My job was to bet on interest rates. So interest rates are supposed to go up when the economy is strong and down when the economy is weak, simplifying quite a bit. But obviously in the financial crisis in 2008, they all collapsed to zero. So very quickly, the job became basically betting when will interest rates recover, which is kind of a proxy bet on when will the economy recover. And the history of that is quite interesting, actually, because basically every single year from 2008 to 2020, markets said interest rates will recover next year. And they were wrong, like every single year, 13 years in a row. So I was sitting there watching these sort of very well-paid traders be wrong every single year and became sort of fascinated understanding why does the economy not recover. I thought long and hard about it for a few years. And I basically came to the conclusion that economists are significantly underestimating the importance of inequality, basically, in the economy. We've got a structural problem with inequality that's not getting better. Rich people save, whereas ordinary people spend. So if that gets worse and worse, you'll have a very low spending economy. Interest rates will never go up. House prices will go up and up and up, and we'll basically have a very weak economy forever. So I started to bet very aggressively that we would never get an economic recovery. And by the end of 2011, I became Citibank's globally most profitable trader. And they gave me a ton of money and said, well done, mate, do it again. But I started to think, probably it's not good if the economy gets worse and worse forever and ever. So I decided to quit to try and let people know how important it is that we do something about inequality.
Why did the government, just going back to 2007, 2008, when the crash arrived, why did the government deal with the pandemic differently to the economic crash? So when the crash happened, the banks were bailed out, financial institutions were helped out, and but for example, in regards to the pandemic, we saw a different approach from the government. We saw the furlough scheme, we saw the universal credit uplift. Why do you think there was a different approach during the pandemic to 2007, 2008?
I think most simply because in terms of size, the pandemic is much, much bigger, much, much more extreme. We're talking about a really big chunk, depending on your country, about a third of your economy of people you basically made it illegal for them to work. So I think they had no choice. If we were to imagine what would have happened had things like the furlough scheme not happened, you would be talking about 10, 20% of the population at risk of starvation. This is just not politically acceptable in the West at the moment. And that there are a number of countries in poorer parts of the world where they did do furloughs with no supports, and it was a genuine humanitarian disaster in those countries. People are starving. Big chunks of the population losing their homes, falling into extreme poverty. So I think the pandemic was sufficiently extreme enough that governments were forced to take those actions, basically. And, in the case of, I'm sitting here in London, in the case of the UK government, they're not really the kind of government which ideologically is supportive of large state intervention to support struggling people, as we can see right now. But when the situation is as extreme as that, there's absolutely, I don't think they have any alternative. I think they were forced to do it.
Yeah, because I think it confused a lot of people, because after the crash in 2008, the Tory government imposed austerity for a number of years. So it was an unusual take, but I think you're right there. Yeah, that it was a situation where it was eat or don't eat, and there was intervention required. Do you think rich nations following the 2007, 2008 crash learned lessons from that?
Sorry, you just cut out on me there.
Oh, sorry.
That question.
So do you think the rich nations learned lessons from the economic crash of 2007, 2008?
No, I don't think they did. In the one sense, if we look at the pandemic itself, we see a much more robust response. But look at what's happening now. And I've been saying from the beginning of the pandemic, what happened in the pandemic was phenomenally interesting from an economic aggressively supporting those in need. On the other hand, they didn't do that by taxing the rich, right? They did that 100% funded by printing money. So it's a half solution, right? Because if you want to support people who are struggling, you need to do two things. You need to give money to people who are struggling, and you need to take money from the people who are benefiting. But they only did one of those things. They gave money to the struggling people. They didn't tax the rich at all. They printed the money. And in fact, COVID saw the largest ever, by enormous stretch, increase in wealth of the super rich in 2 years, which I think is very important for people to understand. And that led to the exact consequence you would expect, which is a massive increase in inequality, a massive increase in inflation, and a massive squeeze in living standards post-pandemic. And we're doing that now. And what governments need to do, never in the history of economics has it been more obvious what governments need to do. Governments need to go to this group of super rich people who have profited unbelievably enormously during the crisis as a result of government policy, tax them to support the people who are struggling to feed their families. But they're not doing it. So I think if you look at what's happening now, what it's showing you really is that they haven't learned any lessons. They haven't, and markets have continued to predict this thing phenomenally incorrectly. Predictions have continued to be phenomenally bad. And we are sitting here now in a situation where big chunks of the population in rich countries can't afford to feed their families. Rich people have seen a 22% single year increase in wealth, the biggest ever increase in wealth in all of history. And yet governments are sitting there saying, well, we're sorry, there's no money left. There's nothing we can do. It should be a scandal. And yet who's talking about it? Who in the media is saying, okay, well, what about that unbelievably phenomenally large increase in wealth of the rich? Are you going to do anything about it? No one's talking about it. No one is even connecting the enormous increase in wealth of the rich with the cost of living crisis.
Why do you think for example, the Labour Party are not taking this on board? Wouldn't this be a vote winner?
So look, I've worked in finance and economics for a long time, and economists have been phenomenally wrong about basically everything for 15 years. So often we I'm left here scratching my head thinking, are these guys intentionally destroying the economy, or are they just basically idiots? And, I recently finished a 2-year master's at Oxford University. I studied economics at LSE. I think, to be honest, these guys have got no idea what's going on. They're clueless, and I sit at home and I make a ton of money betting on it because nobody understands it. I think what we are seeing basically is the death of economics as a discipline. Economists generally are phenomenally bad, unbelievably bad at understanding what's happening. And that is a problem. If you've got cancer, like our economy's got cancer, and your doctor is phenomenally bad, that's a problem. So I think the truth of the matter is, and I sit and I talk with economists who generally sit on the left, and I say, look, we need to fix this enormous accumulation of cash by the richest. This is number one problem. And I just want to give the listeners a sense of scale, all right? In the spring statement here in the UK, the most expensive thing announced by Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, was a cut in income tax. And that's going to cost him £6 billion a year. The amount of money which was transferred from government to the rich during COVID was £450 billion. So 75 times larger, okay? Nothing else matters. If you're worried about anything economically other than the enormous transfer of cash from government to the rich, stop worrying about it. The only thing that matters, and the thing which will dominate the economy for the next 50 years if we let it, is this largest ever historic transfer of wealth from the population to the rich. You need to deal with that. But nobody's talking about it. So I don't blame the Labour Party in particular. It's a massive failing. I mean, is there some outrider in the media who's talking about this in the economics media? I'm doing it, but I don't see anyone else doing it. This is a collective failure of an utterly intellectually and morally bankrupt intellectual class in economics. It's unbelievable what they've done.
Where do you think it needs to begin from, the discussion? You're raising this point, and I've seen you've been interviewed online online, and I think you recently had an interview with Novara Media. Where do we start? How do we combat this?
So what I've decided to do, I've got a YouTube channel which is really targeting it at ordinary people. And the reason I do that,
just to interrupt, I will post links. Guys, do check out Gary's channel and his Twitter account as well. So I'll post that in the link.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's called Gary's Economics. People can have a look if they want to have a look at it. The reason I've done that is because I was writing articles. I wrote for The Guardian, you know, I wrote for Democracy, Huffington Post. And I got kind of well known amongst people who read lefty economics articles, which is almost exclusively people who are not being hurt by what's happening. But people out there, ordinary people, the level of suffering which we're moving into now, it's unbelievable. What's about to happen, and this is just the beginning of it. We're talking about, you know, half the population are worrying about food, literally in rich countries. Okay, but the fact is, you know, the chattering classes of economics, they're not in that half. But there's a lot of people out there that don't know or understand why what is happening now means they can't afford to pay their bills, and they need to have that explained to them, because these are the people. I think change has to come from ordinary people. So what I've decided to do, make this YouTube channel which explains very, very clearly, look, the reason you can't afford to eat and heat your home is because during COVID, we had an unbelievable, enormous transfer of wealth from government to the rich. And I think it's very, very important for people to understand this, okay? And it's explained on my YouTube. You know, I'd encourage people to go look at the first video. But if the government transfers a huge amount of cash to a group of society that is not you, you lose. But it's very easy to not notice it because you haven't seen that, right? And the way you will see it is by inflation. These are very simple, not complicated arguments, okay? If the government gives an enormous amount of cash, a truly enormous amount of cash to those guys over there, you won't know that's happened. And the first time you'll see it is when the prices go up, okay? This is not complicated. That is what has happened now. And the scale of it is unbelievably large. And those people will use that money to buy your houses and to buy the houses that your kids need and to push your family into debt and to push the prices of basic essentials up. That is what is happening. Nobody's talking about it. And the thing that really, really worries me more than anything else is nobody's talking about it. Because if nobody's talking about your problem, the problem doesn't get fixed. And if this problem doesn't get fixed, it's going to be unconscionably, unspeakably bad. So what I think we need to do is, number one, explain to ordinary people. And number one, understand it yourself. You know, and I know I'm pushing my YouTube, but this is where it explains clearly, okay? Go and have a look at the first video on my YouTube. I put it up right at the beginning of COVID. And I said the number one consequence of COVID will be a massive transfer of cash from the rich to the government, from the government to the rich, a massive increase in inflation, house prices, stock prices, and inequality. That's all happening, okay? You need to understand that, because it's going to dominate the financial situation of your family or community. Understand it yourself, and then let your friends and family know. And, you know, if you know people with a public message like yourself, Max, encourage them to talk about it, or share my videos, tell your friends and your family and community. You know, this is not going to get fixed unless people know what's happening. And at the moment, people don't know what's happening. And I'm really worried that the media is going to basically blame this all on Russia, on Vladimir Putin, which means that £450 billion stays. You know, and if that £450 billion stays, you know, there'll be people watching in other countries. It's the same in every country in the rich world, just scaled to the size of your economy. If that enormous transfer of cash from the government to the rich stays, it will destroy the economy for 50 years. So understand what's happening, educate yourself, educate your friends, your family, your community. And if you can, share my message.
You know, something you raised there, of course, is inflation, and how inflation is going to destroy people's incomes and destroy their lives. Something I noticed over the last number of weeks and months is how the Chancellor and the Conservative Party and the government will say how they are raising the living wage and they're providing support for people. But if inflation which is expected to hit 9% this year, that's going to wipe out any support that people do get, which is in a sense crumbs. Inflation is going to completely wipe that out. And most people don't seem to understand that. They see, okay, the government is helping us out. They're giving us a £200 loan. Don't call it a loan, but that's not going to make a dent in the cost of living crisis. And I think while energy prices and food prices are going up, the overall inflation is going to really have a big impact on people, isn't it?
Yeah, it's band-aids on a gaping wound. That's what it is. And look, the numbers don't lie. The numbers don't lie. The amount of money the government is giving back here, the two largest measures in the spring statement were £5 billion and £6 billion annual cost. The amount of money given to the rich during COVID was £450 billion. So if you give 450 billion pounds to the rich and then give 11 billion pounds to ordinary people, which, by the way, is less than the 21 billion pounds they're taking back in national insurance, right? Okay. So if net you take 10 billion from ordinary workers and you give 450 billion in printed money to the rich, then of course the amount that ordinary workers gain from having this little tiny amount come back will be to a scale of 100 less than the amount they lose in inflation. The numbers do not lie here. Look at it's amazing how quickly we've renormalized the government can only spend £5 billion a year, when in the last 2 years they spent 450 billion pounds and that money ended up with the rich. The rich still have that money. If the government were to tax that back, they could spend 450 billion pounds again. But the thing which I keep trying to nail on is, look at the scale of the numbers here. If the government's giving you £5 billion and giving the rich 450 billion pounds, you're going to lose. And the amount of money which you get will not even touch the sides of the inflation which you'll pay. So yeah, it's not enough. I didn't even watch the Spring Statement because I know it's irrelevant. I know it's irrelevant because unless you do something about taking that money back, then it's game over here for ordinary families.
Do you think Brexit has had an impact on wealth inequality?
I think Brexit, to be honest, look, anyone who follows it will I think be aware that it's causing problems. It's definitely causing problems. My big concern is that Brexit is going to be, and I'm not at all saying Brexit is good. I think it's a convenient scapegoat, right, for the fact that we've given a huge amount of money to the rich. And then people can say, well, the problem we're seeing now is because of Brexit. Just as similarly, the people are saying the problem we're seeing now is because of Vladimir Putin and the Russia situation. Brexit is a problem, but again, in terms of scale, it doesn't touch the size of what's happening in COVID. And if we don't see this enormous wealth transfer, if we allow it to be obfuscated by other issues, then we won't do anything about it. So Brexit is problematic. It's not helped the wealth inequality, but from where I'm standing, it's everything else pales in comparison to the enormous wealth transfer of COVID. I know I keep saying that, but that's what I think.
What about other countries around the world? Are there countries that you could point to that are dealing with wealth inequality better than the UK, but maybe the bar is set very low for the UK?
Unfortunately, the direction of travel is similar in most places. I lived in Japan for a couple of years. Wealth inequality is not as bad. I think countries like Japan, what they have is things like a non-avoidable inheritance tax, and that is it's kind of an escape valve, because if very rich families have to pay some tax at least once a generation, then it prevents them accumulating wealth more quickly. But unfortunately, it's an international cultural thing. We've reduced taxes on the rich all over the world. We've kind of accepted this frame that countries have to compete with one another to attract the rich, which means there's a degree to which countries are competing to lower the taxes on rich people. So this is generally an international problem. Even if you look at the countries which are generally considered to be better examples of lower wealth inequality, like the Scandinavian countries, even their wealth inequality is increasing. And I actually think a better example of a place that dealt with wealth inequality better is actually this country 60 years ago. I'm here in the UK. After the Second World War, the UK, and not just the UK, a lot of countries all over the world decided, well, we're not going to allow the rich to just accumulate everything, and we're going to have really high levels of tax on the richest people. And famously, the Beatles paid 95% income tax, but there was a 90% inheritance tax at the time. If you tax rich people at very high levels, then there's a limit to how much they can accumulate. And if you limit how much they can accumulate, it means the rest of us can accumulate. So really, I think the 30 years after the Second World War, it was a number of countries had much higher taxes on rich people. And it's no coincidence that at that time, the average house price was 2 to 3 times average income. Housing was affordable. People like my dad, who worked for the post office for 35 years, could afford a home and a family. Those things are impossible now. So the state of the times is inequality is worsening all over the world. But history shows us it's not impossible to make it go in the other direction.
I think you raised something very interesting there about inheritance. So the idea that in Japan there is the inheritance tax, and of course in the UK there is an inheritance tax, but it's set at a very high bar. So you can inherit a lot before you actually start to pay the tax. And what I want to link into that was what you said at the beginning about the media, how the media are not covering this thing. Instead, what seems to be happening is the media are covering it in the other way. And, you see, you're probably familiar with I think it's the IEA, the think tank, right-wing think tanks that are invited onto the BBC and other outlets to push the idea that no, there is an inheritance tax and the government are coming for everyone's money, when it isn't true. It's actually only people who are probably in the top, maybe in the top 5% of the of the population who are actually paying inheritance tax. But you have a big problem is you have the media who are inviting on people who are willing to push the message of no, we need more income inequality in a hidden way, of course. But you have these people brought on to talk about how, yes, everyone's taxed in the same way. We need to have a flat tax. We need to have more regressive taxation. What's your take on that? How, it's not just us having to put the message out that welcome inequality is a problem, but also countering the sort of rhetoric that the right wing want to put out.
Yeah, I think there's a degree to which sort of the opposition message has an easy fight here, because people don't like tax. I don't like paying tax. I'm sure you don't like paying tax. People don't like to pay tax. So these guys can come out and say, we want to get rid of taxes. Let's get rid of everybody's taxes. And it sounds like a popular message. I think it's important to understand it's not just about how much tax gets paid. It's really important who pays taxes. So you talk about inheritance tax, and the truth is the problem is not so much just the level it comes in at. The problem is it's extremely easy to avoid for very wealthy people. It's extremely easy to avoid for very wealthy people. So it's relatively well known that I made quite a lot of money in the city, and when I worked in the city, I was paying 50% income tax. Okay, I come from a very poor background, all right, and I worked hard and I made a lot of money, and I paid 50% of what I made to the government. Okay, the Duke of Westminster inherited £9 billion and paid nothing. So increasingly, what we have a system of is, who are we taxing here? Are we taxing rich people? It's starting to look conspicuously like a situation where it's a tax specifically on being working class. Why do I pay tax and not the Duke of Westminster? It's because I sound like this and he went to Eton. Really, when it comes down to it, it's about the family that he's from. So it's not just about do you want higher tax or do you want lower taxes? And I think the last 2 years makes that really, really clear, because in a situation where the Chancellor, who is worth £200 million and is from a billionaire family, has presided over the biggest ever increase in wealth for wealthy people, he's then turned around and raised national insurance, which is a tax only paid by working people and which excludes the income of billionaires. He's raised that tax 2.5%. So we're in a situation here where the rich are getting richer at unbelievable speed. Ordinary people can't afford to pay their bills, and yet taxes are being raised on working people. And this is what happens if ordinary people buy the line, which people, like you say, right-wing think tanks and billionaire-owned newspapers tell you, which is, oh, tax is bad, let's get rid of tax. The end result is they get rid of their taxes and they raise your taxes. So listen, don't buy that simplistic message. Stop talking about how much is the level of tax and start talking about who pays it. Who pays it at what rate? Because we're in a situation now where billionaires are paying tax at a significantly lower rate than cleaners. All these people listening will pay higher rates of tax than billionaires. It's all in the news now that the Chancellor's wife is completely avoiding taxes on her income. She's probably paying lower. She's worth billions of pounds, and she's probably paying tax at a lower rate than people who are listening who might be teachers. You know what I mean? So these guys, they're selling you a dream, and it's a lie. Ultimately, they're stealing your money. So some tax needs to be paid, and let's talk about who pays it, because the burden has been entirely shifted off the wealthy, who are the people who can afford to pay it, and placed onto the rest of us. And the end result is that they end up accumulating wealth at an unbelievably rapid rate and taking our wealth from us. So, yeah, of course, they're selling a simplistic message, but we're seeing the results. These are the results. We can't accept it.
Well, one of the arguments against this back in the 1980s, you're probably familiar with, is trickle-down economics. So for those who don't know, can you give maybe a quick explanation as to what trickle-down economics was? It was a Reagan policy, and then why it was so popular and why it didn't work.
Yeah, so the basic idea is if you tax rich people at a low rate, they'll manage to accumulate large amounts of money. And it's actually based on this idea that I said, which is rich people save. Okay, rich people will save a lot of money, then that means they'll invest a lot of money, and that means we'll get economic growth, this kind of thing. I think it was a popular idea because there were some economic problems in the 70s, powers of unions, this kind of thing. But I think it's a simplistic message, right? It comes down to what I said. People don't like paying taxes. So it's a relatively easy sell, right? It's a relatively easy sell. We're going to cut your taxes. We're going to move to a new futuristic era of freedom, and it will be fantastic. And in the short term, it did appear to work. It appeared to work because it created some sort of economic booms. In this country, the UK, we had a boom in the city, and There was also Margaret Thatcher selling off the council houses, which for ordinary people seemed like a good opportunity. But in the long run, what it enabled was wealth to transfer from ordinary people to rich people. Because if you're all rich, if you have a wealth of 10, 20 million pounds, you're going to make £100,000 a year from your wealth. And you can use that money to buy assets from ordinary people. So I think it looks good in the short run, but you need to look at the wealth distribution in the long run. And, the statistics don't lie. In the last 20 years, there's been a massive collapse in investment. And that's because investment doesn't just require people to be saving. It also requires a dynamic economy, which requires people to be spending. And if you have an economy where all of the money goes to the rich, they're saving everything, the rest of us have nothing to spend, we can't spend, then rather than investing, they'll use that money to buy our houses, which is what they're doing. Look at the collapse in home ownership rates from young people. Those houses aren't disappearing. They're going to wealthy families as opposed to ordinary families. So, I'm classically trained economist, but I've worked in the city for a long time and I've been betting on these things for a long time. It's not working. The economy's not getting better. And I'm not just saying that. I've been betting on it for nearly 15 years now and I've made millions of pounds doing it, and I will continue to be right. If you take all of the money out of the pockets of the middle class, then there's no spenders, then your economy will die, and that's what you're seeing. We are seeing the results. It doesn't work. And really, it should have been obvious. If you allow the rich to take everything, nothing will be left for the rest of us, and we will be poor. And increasingly, unfortunately, we are.
I think something you also covered earlier was about how, I think it was your dad was able to buy his own home. And that was something that was really much easier back in the 1960s and 70s and 80s even. How do we get back? Well, is there a plan to get back to something like that? Because obviously there are more and more young people are not able to get on the housing ladder, not able to buy a home. Yeah. Obviously, if you can't buy property, you can't pass it on to your children. So they're not able to inherit something. So they're going to be we're facing generation rent at the moment. Do you see anything on the horizon of getting out of that, or is it just going to get worse?
I'm glad you asked that because my predictions that I've been making are very, very pessimistic, and sometimes I can be difficult to listen to, and I feel that myself. When I'm looking at what's happening, I don't think it's going to be good. I think it's going to be really, really, really bad if we don't do anything. But the key to that is if we grasp the significance of reducing wealth inequality, and we actually take realistic action to do that, the potential for economic improvement is unbelievable. The potential we have to make things better is unbelievable. Because for decades now, we've allowed wealth inequality to grow and grow and grow. And we've seen the results of that. And the end result is, whereas 50 years ago, somebody with no advanced qualifications, no particularly exceptional skills, could work a regular job and support a family and buy a house, that's become impossible. That could be possible again. And not only could that be possible, but much more than that could be possible. Because in those 50 years, we've seen massive advancements and improvements in technology. John Maynard Keynes, one of my favorite economists from a long time ago, he said his grandchildren would be working 10 hours a week. That's what he said, because he saw how the technological improvement could improve the quality of our lives. But it hasn't done that because the improvements have all amassed to this tiny elite. If we were to actually realistically say, look, we don't accept this, we need a fairer wealth distribution, then we could see massive improvements for everyone. The potential for improvement is unbelievably large. We could live in a world where ordinary people could afford property, and if you worked really hard, you could get rich. And I think it's important to realize that that's something we've made impossible now. It's increasingly impossible for people from ordinary backgrounds to get rich. So yeah, we could see enormous improvements. We could make housing affordable. We could make being rich a realistic possibility, but only if we do something about wealth inequality. And if we don't, it will only get worse.
Do you see a UBI as a tool against wealth inequality, or is it just a band-aid?
UBI is very interesting. I think it's important to realize it's not necessarily the panacea. Some people think that it might be, right? Because I think the first thing to realize is UBI is actually in many ways very similar to the welfare state, okay? UBI is we give everybody the basic income they need to survive. And the welfare state is we provide the basic services everyone needs to survive. So UBI, universal basic income, is very similar to welfare state, which you could call universal basic services. And then you need to realize that we are currently existing in a space where the government is rapidly shrinking and defunding the welfare state. So in this space that we're in right now, if we were to bring in the UBI, which would be very expensive, what is the most likely way it will be funded? It would be the dismantling of the welfare state, because we're already dismantling the welfare state, and UBI is similar to the welfare state. So if we were to just say, let's bring in a UBI now, without addressing the very important question of how do you fund it, because it's very expensive, the most likely way it will be funded is the dismantling of the welfare state. And then essentially what you're doing is you're taking money, because the welfare state provides mainly to those most in need, and the UBI provides uniformly. If you were to make that change, you would be taking money away from single mothers and the disabled and the unemployed and giving it to millionaires and billionaires, because they don't receive anything currently from the welfare state. So a UBI in an ideal world, which people won't be surprised to hear me say would be funded by taxation of the very rich, would be fantastic. And it provides a lot of freedom to a lot of people. But if you don't grasp the nettle of saying, well, who's going to pay for it, then the welfare state will pay for it. So UBI could be great if you tax the rich. But to be honest, lots of things could be great if you tax the rich. And that's the difficult thing. You know, like if you look at COVID, we saw during COVID a massive increase in government spending. And you might say that would be great. But then you realize if you don't fund it by taxing the rich, you end up funding it by inflation for ordinary workers. You know, it's very, very important that we deal with this question of how do you fund it? And we make sure the rich fund it. Because at the moment, every time we ask for something, they give it to us, but they don't fund the rich and then they take it from us. You see what I'm saying? So
yeah.
UBI could be great, but none of these questions are relevant unless you deal with the underlying question, which is a cancer in our economy, of how do you tax the rich? Because at the moment, increasingly, we can't tax them at all. So if you don't tax them, they will take everything. You know, this is essentially an invasion. These guys want all of our assets, you know, and if we don't tax them, they will take them. And if we don't have anything, then we can't afford anything. So UBI could be great if you tax the rich. Be very, very careful of supporting it if you're not also campaigning for it has to be funded by taxing the rich.
Recently, Boris Johnson attended a select committee, and he was asked about, you know, the increase in national insurance contributions, and he said, look, there's no other way. Either we raise debt, we increased debt, or we tax people, and we don't want to tax people. Obviously, he doesn't want to tax some people; he wants to tax other people. So, on you know, the Tories are in power at the moment. They don't want to tax the rich. The Labour Party, we don't hear a lot about it. There are talking about a windfall tax. Maybe, for example, would a windfall tax be, once again, very small baby steps towards ending income inequality? But do you see things like a windfall tax as something positive, or is it just a political stance that's not going to really have a long-term impact?
The first thing I want to say is the fact that Boris Johnson feels comfortable to go on TV and say there's nothing else we can do really underlines this main message I'm trying to give out, which is of such critical importance that we understand and share the message that the wealthy have made an unbelievable, historic increase in their wealth during the last 2 years, and that has come essentially from government. Because if everybody knew that, then everybody would turn around and say, what on earth do you mean there's nothing else you can do? These guys have amassed an enormous amount of money during a crisis. You have the option of taxing them, and you're choosing not to do it. So I think that's number one. People need to understand that this group of people, and I'm just going to hammer that down, sorry, a little bit more, okay? The amount of money printed by the government and given out, which accumulated by the rich, was £10,000 per adult in the country. But that's all been accumulated by the top 10%, okay? Which means every single person in the top, every single adult in the top 10% has accumulated, on average, £100,000. So if you're talking about a family, you know, mother, father, 2 adult kids, they've accumulated during crisis £400,000, an unbelievably large amount of money. So if you're out there and you don't have £10,000 more now than you had pre-COVID, someone's got your £10,000, and it's going to be a rich person. Okay, so the number one thing is, do not accept anybody saying there's nothing else we can do, because the rich have made an enormous amount of money. You know, in the US, the average billionaire has doubled their wealth during COVID. Doubled their wealth. The average billionaire in this country has made £670 million in just the first year of COVID, increase in wealth. So there's more money than there ever has been. Okay. That's number one. Don't accept them ever saying we have no alternatives, because they've given that money to the rich, and the rich still have that money, and it can be taxed. With regards to a windfall tax, okay, in essence, what I'm saying is we need a windfall tax in a way. But these guys are talking about a windfall tax only on oil and gas companies. You know, that's a tiny fraction of the economy. And actually, oil and gas companies are not the best performing area. You know, the problem is not the oil and gas companies. The problem is the rich as a group have amassed an enormous amount of wealth from us. And if we start picking specific sectors, it becomes rather arbitrary. You know what I mean? And I know it's easy. Okay, the problem now is oil and gas prices, so let's go after oil and gas companies. Okay, what about Jeff Bezos? You know what I mean? He doesn't own an oil and gas company. You know, why just the oil? It's bizarre, and I understand it. Maybe it's politically expedient, but it's not enough. It's not going to work. You can't give money to all the rich people and then go back and say, oh, we're going to take this little bit back. You know, again, it's about scale. It's about scale. The amount of money given to the rich has been enormous. And if we only take 2, 3, 4% of it back, then we only take back 2, 3, 4% of the damage. You know, so I think the number one thing people need to understand, well, there's two key things. Number one, the rich have made an enormous amount of wealth during COVID, enormous. And that's come essentially from you, from the taxpayer, from the government. Number two, that is the cause of the problem. So if we don't reverse that, the problem won't be reversed. And if we reverse it only partially, the problem will be reversed only partially. So to be honest, I don't take any comfort from the talk of a windfall tax on oil and gas companies, because it's not going to be nearly enough. It needs to be a windfall tax on all wealthy people. And to be honest, we need to deal with the situation of the rich being able to avoid taxes completely. You know, we see the story right now about Rishi Sunak's wife. She probably doesn't pay any tax on any of her income. You know, if that situation persists, then of course they will take all of our assets. Because if you have to pay away 50% of your income, more when you include just basic essentials, many people pay away 100% of their income when you include everything. And these people are making 50 million, 100 million pounds a year and paying no tax. Well, do you think your kids are going to be able to afford houses when they're competing with their kids?
Of course not. No. There was something I wanted to ask you, but I've forgotten it now. No. It's a bugbear of mine. The idea of money in politics. Do you think if we could get money out of politics, so you have people donating, for example, to the Conservative Party, but also the Labour Party, but that's for a different reason, I think. But there, you have very rich people donating to the Conservative Party in order for the Conservative Party to push through policies that protect those rich people. If we could get that money out, if we could make it that political parties are publicly funded, they can't take donations from members of the public or from organizations, do you think that would help push? So you'd have politicians who would be in office, who would be, well, hopefully would be there to help the public, to push policies through that would actually help members of the public, ordinary people, and not the people who actually donated to the party. Or is that pie in the sky?
I think it would help. I think it would help for sure. I don't think it would necessarily solve everything. I mean, if you look at the situation we have now, the Chancellor himself is worth something like 250 million pounds. His father-in-law is a billionaire. His wife is a billionaire.
Richer than the Queen.
Yeah, richer than the Queen. Yeah, famously. I mean, in that sense, they don't need to rely on donors because they're literally in the party. They're literally the people making decisions. So we have a chancellor who's part of a billionaire family deciding tax policy.
Sorry, can I just say? I find it fascinating how he can sit there in a select committee and talk about £50 for this or £200 for that. He has no understanding of what £200 means to a family. He could drop £200 on the toilet floor, on the floor of a public toilet, and he wouldn't pick it up because
I think it's important for people to understand that Rishi Sunak is not just rich. I get spoken about as rich. Rishi Sunak is more than 100 times richer than me, and I'm a millionaire. And when we include his family, we're talking about 1,000, 2,000 times richer than me. He's phenomenally, unbelievably rich. His wealth just from his income every year will be something like 8-9 million pounds. That's what he gets for getting out of bed. And his wife's income will be something like 10, 20 times more than that, just for getting out of bed. These guys are very, very, very rich people. So it's of course we want politicians to care about the people, and if the main part is receiving donations from super rich people, that's part of the problem. But unfortunately, the problem goes deeper than that, because I go on the news and I talk about we need to tax rich people more, and nobody's paying me to do that. I'm entirely self-funded. I don't get paid for this work. I do it because I think it's important. But I'll be up against somebody who works for example, the IEA, Institute of Economic Affairs, and they're being paid by a billionaire, and I'm competing with things like the Daily Mail, which are owned by a billionaire, and the Telegraph, the Times, owned by a billionaire. I go on Sky News, owned by a billionaire. And I've got videos on my YouTube where I talk about this, but, even if you keep them out of politics, if they control the media, there's a degree to which, to be honest, the media controls politics. The reason why I'm on a YouTube channel, I'm not a member of the Labour Party, is because I think there's a big degree to which the media is more powerful than the politicians. ultimately, if you control what the people think and what the people believe and what the people know, then it doesn't really matter what the politicians do because the people won't vote for them, and that's why I'm absolutely going crazy and screaming from the rooftops saying, why are the media not talking about this enormous accumulation of cash by the richest? Because that is the only thing that matters in the economy. And I think that's a good example of it. If people knew and if people understood what an enormous amount of cash the rich had made in the last couple of years, if they knew that come from the taxpayer, and if they knew that was the cause of inflation, it would be fixed. So unfortunately, the problem goes beyond politics. It also involves the media. And what we need to do is understand and educate. We're never going to be able to compete financially with the big media, but we have our communities, and we ultimately, we are the people who are affected. We are in the communities of people who are affected. We need to become our own media. We need to educate ourselves, and we need to educate one another. And we need to say, look, when you go on Gary's Economics, he's not being paid for that. And when you read, the Daily Mail, that's owned by a billionaire. Understand where your information is coming from, what's trustworthy and what's not. So it would be great to get money out of politics, but there's also a lot more work to be done.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on today. And I think, you're 100% correct. The idea that, in the past, you had the media, it was very much controlled. The billionaires decided, but things like YouTube, Twitter, social media is, it's a way to fight back. And I think that's really important. So I want to say once again, thanks so much, Gary, for coming on today. I recommend everyone to check out your YouTube channel and your Twitter. Do you have any other places on social media where we can find you?
I've got an Instagram as well for those who prefer to, and a Facebook. Yeah, I'm on everything basically.
Okay, so I'll post all that in the description of the video. Thanks once again so much, and keep up the good fight, because this is really the issue, and we tend to focus on the pandemic and even Brexit. I have my position on Brexit, but income inequality really is the big issue that needs to be resolved over the next number of years. So once again, thanks so much for that.
Thank you.